I think one of the number one rules of litigation, like it or not, is you go after the deep pocket.
And those deep pockets are firing back, calling Lil Rod's lawsuit against P. Diddy breathtakingly absurd. High-profile defendants mentioned in the case, like Universal Music Group and its CEO, say Lil Rod has brought on a nonsensical argument with allegations that are completely false.
It's not surprising to me that they were named given the relationship, but it doesn't necessarily mean there are merits there.
And that's exactly what those defendants are saying now. But before we get into all that, we have to talk about the serious accusations leveled against P. Diddy himself. You know him by many names, from Diddy to Puffy, Puff, or Puff Daddy. He's 54-year-old Sean Combs, a rapper, record label exec, and entrepreneur. And in the past month, we've seen what could be described as the beginning of Diddy's downfall, starting when federal search warrants were executed at two of Diddy's properties. To be clear, no criminal charges have been filed against Diddy, and we can't even confirm whether Diddy himself is the target of those federal raids. But with reasonable inferences, we can guess what the feds were looking for. Hundreds of hours of footage and audio recordings showing Diddy and his associates allegedly engaging in some serious illegal activity. That's straight from Rodney Jones' civil lawsuit that was filed back in February. He's better known as Lil Rod, who worked as a producer on Diddy's Love album. Lil Rod's lengthy lawsuit laid out some pretty shocking claims, including that Diddy sexually assaulted him, forced him to have sex with a prostitute, and even groomed Lil Rod for sex with other people, including celebrities. This isn't the first time we're hearing allegations of this kind, though. In November of last year, Diddy's ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura, known as the singer Cassie, filed a civil suit against him, claiming physical and sexual abuse. Cassie's lawsuit was settled one day after it was filed, but the damage had been done. 3 other women came forward in the same time frame, accusing Diddy of rape. The difference between their lawsuits and Lil Rod's is that Lil Rod went after more than just Diddy. Also listed as defendants, Motown Records, Universal Music Group, and its CEO, Lucian Charles Grange. I asked criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Matthew Mangino about this. Lil Rod says the CEO of Universal Music Group exerted some control over the Combs RICO enterprise and recklessly disregarded the existence of sex trafficking. That's a pretty big allegation to put on the CEO of Universal Music Group. What do you make of that?
That's a significant allegation, and you better have some real good evidence to back that up, because you're making a claim that has far-reaching implications for the person that's the target of those claims. But I think we don't want to get confused again by the idea of RICO. So again, this is not a criminal case, and RICO is a racketeering statute, a federal racketeering statute, and states have their own RICO statutes as well. But the federal racketeering, it would have to be a criminal enterprise. So while we're talking about things like rape, sexual abuse, we're not talking about them in a criminal context when we're talking about Jones's case, because he's filed a civil action. He's suing Diddy and the others in civil court. So you might have these terms thrown around a little bit, maybe even mentioned in the complaint, but they're more like sort of decoration. They really don't go to the substance of the civil case, which you have to prove.
When I spoke to entertainment attorney Mitra Ohurian, she said the same thing, that Universal's team will soon be making some moves.
But when you start getting a company, a label like Universal, which is one of the biggest labels, being named, they got their own team of corporate lawyers that are going to jump on it and also put pressure, on the artist to either settle it out or cooperate.
So now that's just what we're seeing. Those other defendants pushing back. In a filing made just this week, Donald Zacharin, who represents Universal Music Group, or UMG, Motown Records, and Lucian Grange, called out Lil Rod and his attorney. Zacharin is pretty to the point, writing, quote, I submit this declaration in support of the motion of UMG's defendants pursuant to federal rule to strike impertinent and scandalous material from the SAC. The SAC stands for Second Amended Complaint. Zakarin straight up says there is a lack of any factual basis for the allegations made against the UMG defendants in the SAC. Zakarin refers a lot to the SAC, the Second Amended Complaint, and the FAC, First Amended Complaint. So let's break that down. The First Amended Complaint was filed by Lil Rod on February 26th. Among the defendants listed, UMG, Motown Records, and their current and former CEOs, Lucian Charles Grange and Ethiopia Habtemariam. The Second Amended Complaint was filed on March 25th with some notable changes. To start, more than 20 pages were added to the filing, and taken away from the complaint, former Motown CEO Ethiopia Habtemariam's name as a defendant. I asked Matthew about this. So why would they drop one CEO and leave the other?
Well, that's an interesting question, but there must have been something that was brought to the plaintiff's attention or their legal counsel that, hey, this defendant you have listed is not an appropriate defendant. They're in no way involved in this. Maybe it's a timing thing when you look at the sort of the timeline on this case, that it's impossible that she could have been involved or could have condoned any of this activity. So sometimes plaintiffs are faced with the possibility that, hey, this is wrong. She doesn't fit into this picture that you're trying to paint, but you're leaving her in there. You could have problems yourself, for going forward with a case like that. The other defendants, again, I would be surprised if we don't see some effort to get them removed from this suit. But if they stay in the case, discovery is going to be an interesting process.
But now, Lucian Grange's attorney is seeking to have his name and UMG and Motown removed from Lil Rod's suit altogether. But even that's not enough. In his newest filing, Zakarin writes, quote, "Obtaining the dismissal of the SAC for legal insufficiency does not and cannot fully address the harm that plaintiff and Mr. Blackburn, Lil Rod's attorney, have visited on my clients." So let's break down the claims made in Lil Rod's suit that UMG's team says are false. To start, UMG says there are factual errors and inconsistencies between the first and second amended complaints. For instance, the SAC admits that Mr. Grange lives in Los Angeles, while the FAC falsely alleged contacts between Mr. Grange and New York. Those allegations have been made abandoned in the SAC. Additionally, UMG's team asserts Lucian Grange has never been to any of Diddy's homes. The new filing says Lil Rod and his team falsely and offensively alleged that Grange was present at freak-off parties at Mr. Combs' homes in Los Angeles, Miami, and New York, where underage girls and sex workers were allegedly plied with drugs and alcohol and sexually preyed upon, as plaintiff claims he was. Lil Rod doubles down on this in a recent filing, saying he personally saw executives from the defendant record label present at the recording sessions during the times that sex workers were present. Lil Rod's filing also includes pictures of an alleged sex worker at the recording studio. But Matthew says this argument could be kind of flimsy.
I guess, Sarah, it would matter if the sex workers were plying their trade or they were just there in the studio, observing what goes on. I mean, sex workers, they don't work 24 hours a day. I mean, so they have a job and they have other things that they do. So yeah, if you have a photograph with a sex worker and she's completely clothed and you're smiling at the camera, I don't think that's an issue. Now, if you have photographs of people engaging in sex in the studios, I think there you have a problem.
Per Lil Rod's lawsuit, Lucian Grange, UMG, and Motown Records knowingly received financial benefits in return for its assistance, support, and facilitation of Combs' sex trafficking venture. Lil Rod also says they actively participated in the sex trafficking conspiracy and led Mr. Jones, sex workers, and underage girls to believe that they would be rewarded if they cooperated and acquiesced to Mr. Combs's coercive demands. There's a lot of allegations about rape, the sex workers, as we talked about, shootings that sometimes, or people using illicit drugs. There's a lot happening there. And that begs the question, is it up to the record label, the studio, to make sure that there's security there? Is that something that they could be liable for, not having the proper security, allowing people to bring in guns or underage girls, things like that?
Well, I think if illegal conduct is happening on company property and company people know about it, that could be a problem. Okay. Um, Listen, we know from what we read in the tabloids and things like that, that entertainers and famous people can be pretty particular and they can get easily agitated, and they're your breadwinner. So you don't want to make your star mad if you can avoid it. And so I'm sure that things happen or things are tolerated more than they might be, down at XYZ Corporation's office. Um, but still, that doesn't eliminate your responsibility. If you know people are being abused, if you know people are being victimized, on your company property, that could open the door to having some responsibility. Now, if everything at the studio is fine and everything at the office is fine, but downtown at the hotel where they've um, uh, reserved a suite, I mean, then I don't think you can hold a company accountable for that. Even if you have rumors that, hey, bad things might be going on down there, there is the private life and your professional life, and I don't think necessarily that an employer can be responsible for an employee's private life.
UMG's team denies all of this, saying it's chronologically impossible based on the timeline of its business relationship with Diddy. The newest filing states that there was never a partnership between Motown Records and/or UMG and Love Records, Inc. There was only an arm's-length license agreement to distribute one album, Diddy's Love album, entered into May 2022 and terminated as of February 1st, 2023. So UMG says it's a nonsensical argument that the UMG defendants supposedly should have known that Mr. Combs was engaging in alleged sex trafficking activity because of a complaint filed by Cassie Ventura. UMG argues that its relationship with Diddy's Love Records ended in February 2023, 9 months before Cassie filed that suit. Then there's Lil Rod's allegation that Universal Music Group concealed its delivery of vast sums of cash, likely millions of dollars, to Mr. Combs and his associates. UMG calls this accusation a fantasy, saying Lil Rod made baseless accusations that the UMG defendants were obligated to assure that Diddy properly filed and paid taxes and are responsible for their alleged failure to make the required filings. UMG's team says their clients not only were inexplicably required to monitor and control how Combs spent his money, they were somehow required to trace the alleged use of money by Combs. And Matthew agrees with this. It's not up to UMG or its CEO to keep track of when Diddy files taxes or how he spends his money.
That would be extreme. If we think about our own lives, what if you picked up your paycheck, this Friday, and the company said, hey, what are you going to spend this money on? What are you going to do? Where are you going tonight? Where's this money going? I mean, that's unrealistic that your employer, even if it is large sums of money, if you've earned that money, I mean, you can do it with you want. Now, of course, if you're doing illegal things with it, well, you're putting yourself in jeopardy. I don't think anybody would necessarily say that if an employee committed a crime with their paycheck, that their employer is responsible for it. Now, that's kind of simplifying it. We're not really looking at exactly what the allegations are. I think a much better argument, if they have one at all, would be that these people were somehow involved in this conduct directly. Uh, you know, at parties or meetings or gatherings, or they knew what was going on at these meetings and gatherings and didn't do anything about it, almost like it was on company time, then you might be able to make a connection. But saying you pay somebody and they use their money for illegal activity is a reach for an employer.
Then there's Lil Rod's accusation of wire and mail fraud that UMG calls out in its new filing too, saying the accusations don't hold any water. It reads, quote, "The claim alleges wire and mail fraud without a single specific allegation. Nor does it identify who supposedly sent what communication by wire or mail to whom and when it was sent, or what it said that made it fraudulent." Mitra says amidst these recent filings, UMG and Motown are likely taking a look back at the past paperwork involving P. Diddy.
A lot of times when you have these agreements between various labels or his label or an artist and a label, you're going to have an indemnification clause. So we have to remember this is a civil lawsuit. Indemnification clauses mean that if one party does something to injure the other party, so in this case, it would be if Diddy created scenarios where that created liability for Universal and Universal gets sued, that Diddy's going to have to flip the bill. So there's that, but you also now have this very, label that has multiple artists who are very well known, who don't want to be associated with this scandal and drama that's going on. So they have a big interest. And I don't, it's not surprising to me that they were named given the relationship, but it doesn't necessarily mean there are merits there.
So what's next? UMG made it clear in its filing, writing, quote, "We will be serving and in due course filing an updated motion with this court for Rule 11 sanctions against plaintiff and Mr. Blackburn. But our first and primary goal is to secure the speedy dismissal of the SAC with prejudice." As for Diddy's side of things, still no criminal charges have been filed. His team has kept quiet, only issuing several statements. In regards to the federal raids, they say, quote, "There is no excuse for the excessive show of force and hostility exhibited by authorities or the way his children and employees were treated." A short statement was also released about Lil Rod's lawsuit, quote, "His reckless name-dropping about events that are pure fiction and simply did not happen is nothing more than a transparent attempt to garner headlines. We have overwhelming, indisputable proof that his claims are complete lies." Also of note, Lil Rod recently filed a summons to all defendants requiring a response. We've now heard from UMG asking that the allegations against them be dismissed, but we haven't yet heard from Diddy. That's something we can expect to see in the next few weeks. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.